Well, friends, news just broke that Donald Trump intends to sue the Department of Justice for malicious prosecution. And in some more breaking news, I intend to win the gold medal in the 100-meter dash at the 2028 LA Olympics. That was me running fast. Don't worry, we'll edit all that out. Let's talk about Donald Trump's latest nonsense. Because justice matters.
Christmas cards are coming.
Hey all, Glenn Kirshner here. So friends, with Donald Trump, it's enter grifting, leave grifting, and grift all the while in between, and here he goes again. He has just announced that he's going to sue the Department of Justice for maliciously prosecuting him in the Mar-a-Lago classified documents, obstruction of justice, espionage case. Let's start with the new reporting, and then let's talk about what is obviously really going on here. This from NBC News. Headline, Trump plans to sue Justice Department over Mar-a-Lago search and prosecution. And that article begins, an attorney for former President Donald Trump has filed a legal notice announcing that his client plans to sue the Justice Department and the FBI for $115 million for alleged malicious political prosecution and abuse of process. The notice, a copy of which NBC News obtained Monday, baselessly accuses DOJ leadership and special counsel Jack Smith of having perpetrated a malicious political prosecution aimed at affecting an electoral outcome to prevent President Trump from being reelected, a frequent accusation that Trump makes online and during campaign events. Quote, this malicious prosecution led President Trump to spend tens of millions of dollars defending the case and his reputation, Trump attorney Daniel Z. Epstein wrote in a notice of claim against the department. Epstein is a former Trump White House lawyer who is now vice president of America First Legal, the legal group founded by former Trump advisor Stephen Miller. The filing complains that the FBI's court-approved search for classified documents at Trump's Florida estate in August of 2022 was improper, as was Trump's subsequent indictment for the scores of sensitive classified documents that agents turned up during the search. Trump had pleaded not guilty. The filing, which was first reported by Fox News, said the search violated well-established protocol involving former presidents and cites, and here it is, friends, the rock-solid evidence, the irrefutable proof Donald Trump and his lawyers are prepared to offer in support of their lawsuit against the Department of Justice. Here comes the evidence. They cite a Trump social media post after the search saying the government could have had the records anytime they wanted. All they had to do was ask, the Truth Social post said. That is the rock-solid evidence they're offering in support of this lawsuit, that this was a malicious prosecution. I mean, how can DOJ get around that? Donald Trump posted, well, they could have had the documents anytime they wanted. All they had to do was ask. Well, case closed. I guess DOJ owes Donald Trump $1 bazillion. That was all my editorial comment. The article continues. The filing does not mention the multiple requests from the National Archives and the Justice Department for Trump to return the records. The DOJ had also issued a subpoena for the return of such documents in May of 2022, and an attorney for Trump signed a declaration stating the classified documents, had all been returned that June. The search warrant was executed after investigators got information that they had been misled. They had been lied to by Trump and his lawyers, swearing in an affidavit all classified documents had been returned when in fact hundreds were still being unlawfully retained, hidden away, moved from boardroom to ballroom to bathroom in Trump's desperate attempt to hide them. But Donald Trump cites as his rock-solid proof that he tweeted, "All they had to do was ask and I would have given them over." Okay, friends, let's quickly knock down Donald Trump's nonsense by the numbers, 1 through 5. 1, can you sue the federal government? Can you sue the Department of Justice? The answer is yes, but it's really hard. Why is it really hard? Well, because the federal government, federal agents, federal employees, federal officers have a healthy dose of what's called sovereign immunity. It's a fancy term, but essentially what it means is if federal government employees, officers, agents, former federal prosecutors, for example, are doing their work day in and day out, and it's work that they are authorized to do, it is within the scope of their official duties, then they can't be prosecuted because some people are displeased with the decisions they made or the work they have done. I've always said, friends, as a career federal prosecutor, every time I made a prosecutorial decision, I was probably going to make somebody unhappy. If I decided to pursue an indictment, a prosecution, I would make the defendant unhappy, the defendant's loyalists, maybe if it was a gang case, the defendant's criminal associates, the defendant's family members, maybe the defendant's community. If I declined to bring a charge, I might make the victim unhappy, the victim's family, the victim's community. So I was likely to make somebody unhappy, regardless of what prosecutorial decision I made. However, I couldn't be sued by the defendant or the defendant's family, the victim or the victim's family, if I was acting within the scope of my duties as a federal prosecutor. Think about it. If people could bring lawsuits against federal government employees for every decision they make, every act they undertook because somebody was unhappy about it, well then federal government employees and officers would spend all day, every day in court defending themselves against lawsuits. So that's why the federal government has a healthy dose of sovereign immunity, immunity against such lawsuits being brought. Now, 2, you can sue the government. You can sue the Department of Justice, but if you do, it's governed by a law called the Federal Tort Claims Act. It's a federal law that's been on the books since, I think, 1946. And your first question might be, okay, what the hell is a tort? Fair question. A tort is a fancy word for when one person wrongfully injures another. The injury can be physical, it can be financial. Think breach of contract. 2 people enter into a contract. One person wrongfully violates or breaches the contract. That could give rise to civil liability, right? So a tort is just when one person wrongfully injures the person or financial interests of another person, and it could give rise to a lawsuit and financial liability. That's what a tort is. So the Federal Tort Claims Act says if you want to sue the federal government, you first have to give notice of your intent to bring the suit. And that's what Donald Trump just did. I'm suing the federal government for maliciously prosecuting me. But here's the thing, friends. Under the Federal Tort Claims Act, the federal government has 6 months to even respond, to decide whether they want to waive their own sovereign immunity because they think they really did something wrong and they want to enable the person to sue the federal government. They ain't going to waive their own sovereign immunity because they've done nothing wrong. But they have 6 months to make that decision. And the presidential election is less than 3 months away, which brings us to point number 3. This is a BS PR move by Donald Trump. Do you really think this lawsuit is going to move forward in the next 3 months? Of course not. This is so Donald Trump can stand up at his hate rallies and say, I'm suing the federal government, the Department of Justice, for maliciously prosecuting me in the Mar-a-Lago classified documents case. So please send me your hard-earned dollars, whatever money you might have left in your pocket that you haven't sent me already. Because remember, Donald Trump enters grifting, leaves grifting, and grifts in between from start to finish. That's obviously what this is about. 4, the government won't waive sovereign immunity and allow itself to be sued. But if it did, Donald Trump would lose that suit hands down. Why? Well, the Mar-a-Lago prosecution commenced when Donald Trump steadfastly refused over and over and over again to return the classified documents he obviously was unlawfully retaining at Mar-a-Lago. The National Archives asked him repeatedly. The FBI, the DOJ asked him repeatedly. There was a grand jury subpoena, which is the equivalent of a court order requiring him to turn over the classified documents, and he violated it. Indeed, he had one of his lawyers certify that no, Donald Trump has turned over all classified documents. That was a lie. He still had 100 plus that he was unlawfully retaining. All of that evidence I've just described was put in an affidavit. That's a sworn statement, sworn to by an FBI office agent under the penalties of perjury, presented to a federal judge, and the federal judge said, absolutely, there's enough evidence that a crime was committed and that evidence of that crime is located at Donald Trump's home, Mar-a-Lago, and I am authorizing the search. So there was nothing unlawful about the search. The search produced buku evidence. It's a legal term, buku. Lots of evidence that Donald Trump had been unlawfully retaining classified documents, had committed crimes, and that was the basis in part of the indictment. The indictment was not lawless. The prosecution was not malicious. So even if this case ever was actually brought by Donald Trump and litigated, Donald Trump would lose running away. Which brings us to the 5th and final point. Some people have appropriately asked, well, wait a minute, will the fact that Judge Cannon, Aileen Cannon, dismissed this case give Donald Trump any ammunition to claim that the prosecution really was malicious and unlawful and unconstitutional? The answer is no. The reason the answer is no is because Judge Aileen Cannon, first of all, was wrong on the facts and the law. Every other judge that has ever had to decide the legal issue of whether special counsel is a thing, is lawful, is constitutional, it is something we have been doing in our criminal justice system in one form or another since the 1800s, independent counsel, special prosecutor. Every other judge and every other court has ruled, of course it is lawful. Judge Cannon said, not to me. And she did an enormous, I would argue, lawless favor for Donald Trump yet again. So the fact that she said, I don't think special counsel is a thing, so I'm dismissing the case, doesn't convert the prosecution into a malicious prosecution, because the prosecution is based on the evidence, not on the appointment of special counsel. So even if this case ever went to trial, and it wouldn't, this case, meaning this legal suit against the Department of Justice that Donald Trump is threatening, if it ever were to be litigated, Donald Trump would just lose badly. So friends, this has all the earmarks of just another Donald Trump grift, another PR stunt so it will give him something to say at his rallies. You know, I'm suing the Department of Justice for prosecuting me. And to people who operate in a fact-free world, Donald Trump's base, his supporters, at least many of them, you know, maybe when Donald Trump says, I'm suing DOJ, they will hear that as, oh, he must have evidence. He must have a strong case against the Department of Justice, and that's why he's suing them, and that's why he will be successful in that suit. You know, if you act in a fact-free environment, maybe that's the conclusion you reach, and maybe you even let Donald Trump victimize you yet again by sending him your hard-earned money. You know, I think it qualifies as irony that the people who are victimized the most by Donald Trump are not the Democrats, are not the people who see through his every lie, his every ruse, his every grift, but the people who don't see through it or won't see through it because they empty their pockets. You know, and frankly, these may, in many instances, be folks who could use that extra $5 or $10 or $100 rather than, you know, stuffing that money into the pocket of a career conman who laughs at his own supporters, his own base. You know, and hopefully when Donald Trump is in the rearview mirror, and hopefully we see him in a prison cell held accountable for the crimes he's committed against the people of the United States, hopefully the lives of his supporters, his base, will become a little bit better as well, because we want that for everybody, left, right, and center. And because justice matters. Friends, as always, please stay safe, please stay tuned, and I look forward to talking with you all again tomorrow.
Let's just start with the backstory. The Steve Bannon kid, the brawler, your brother said, right? In what way?
Well, I mean, it was our neighborhood became it was kind of, you know, white working class, lower middle class, old internal suburb of a old city, Richmond. So it was inside the city limits, very close to downtown, and it became predominantly black in the 60s. And my parents, you know, wouldn't leave. That was our neighborhood. So it was a pretty, you know, it was a fairly tough, north side of Richmond is a fairly tough section of town.
Walls, if you know that one. This has been a pretty fast, consistent rise. And of course, the twist this year was her becoming the nominee. And that is confounding Trump. Democrats have long argued that Donald Trump's policies pull America into the past. Harris, though, now embodies that contrast in a whole new way, rising with this energy and this enthusiasm against an opponent 20 years her senior. Now, I told you we have that Trailblazers special coming up in just moments, but on this breaking news with all of the Trump issues, I want to bring in our political science professor from Fordham University, Christina Greer, the author of Black Ethnics. Welcome. This is how Trump is starting the week. A lot of those quotes were from people around him. What do you see in the campaign as we start the week?
Well, you know, as you reminded your audience, Ari, it's only been 3 weeks since Kamala Harris was elevated to the top of the ticket, and it's only been 6 days since Governor Walz was added to the ticket. And so the momentum is real. The money that's been pouring in is real, and not just big donations, but small donations, which actually can translate into votes because people are feeling invested and excited about this new race. It's a new race in many ways. Donald Trump's strategy was, you know, don't vote for the old guy because the black woman might become the president if something happens to him. Well, Joe Biden has stepped aside, and now Donald Trump is scrambling for a message, which is she's not that smart. That's not really resonating with a lot of voters who have seen her not just as the vice president for the past 3+ years. She was a senator for several years. She was the attorney general of the largest state in the nation. She has a very impressive resume, more impressive than a lot of people who run for the presidency. So his tactics aren't landing. He's scrambling. And we also know, and you all have talked about this, his choice of vice president is feeling very Sarah Palin-esque, is an impulse buy in many ways. And so J.D. Vance isn't adding to the ticket or the base. And so it's one unforced error after another. And we know Donald Trump spirals when things don't go his way.
Well, that's tough talk, as you know, Professor, because Palin was viewed as the kind of rare running mate who actually hurt a ticket rather than just being sort of ignored or sort of priced in. She was really seen as a drag in the end. But you mentioned that contrast with Biden, and Peggy Noonan, the former Reagan speechwriter, really talk about telling truth to her audience. The Wall Street Journal readers, generally conservative Wall Street types, they've generally rooted for Republicans. But she writes, Harris won her third week in a row. Trump spent most of the week having what a GOP strategist told Politico is a public nervous breakdown. Trump is 78. He hasn't been able to focus or make his case. And she asked the question, is he, in another irony of 2024, turning into Joe Biden? And Professor Greer, leaving aside the many different reactions people could have to Joe Biden, to her audience, she means that as a political liability.
Absolutely. I mean, the fundamental difference is Joe Biden loves and cares about this country, and Donald Trump loves and only cares about himself. But that being said, many people thought it was just going to be dinosaur versus dinosaur on November 5th. And that's not what we have anymore. And so we have Donald Trump, who lost in 2020. He lost the popular vote in 2016. And I do think, he's a very savvy politician. I will give him that. But he's not disciplined. And so, if he had discipline around him, he would sort of go with more traditional Republican talking points and a traditional way to run against Kamala Harris. That's not something that is in Donald Trump's wheelhouse. So he is thrown off because his strategy was, I can just sort of talk about Joe Biden and beat him up. And I'm the big man, and, I can essentially bully my way back into the White House because he knows essentially it's the White House or the big house if he doesn't win. And so now he's completely discombobulated. And as we see more and more independents and weak-leaning Republicans move away from his type of rhetoric, I think the downward spiral has occurred. And so sadly, we're going to see a different type of politic and rhetoric from Donald Trump, which will be even more insulting and degrading of the office of the presidency.
Right. And as you say, as a political scientist, those are certain patterns. When down, you want debates. When down by a lot, you do anything to shake it up. You get desperate, you throw mud. And yet there's a lot of signs about how some of that is wearing thin. Professor Greer, I'd love to talk to you more, but I got these 4 trailblazers standing by.
Amazing
so
women.
Thank you for kicking us off tonight.
Absolutely. All right. Anytime.
Thank you, Professor. Appreciate it. As mentioned, we have always the daily news. We started with your campaign update. But beyond that, there's something larger that's been happening. A lot of people clearly feel it. Maybe you do, too. The White House color line, which first fell.
New reporting from inside the Trump campaign highlights a Donald Trump who is obviously rattled by a series of events, which due in large part to his inability to adapt or accept, now find him trailing in several key battleground states, a scenario seemingly unimaginable 1 month ago. From that New York Times reporting, Trump has been whipsawed by a 7-week roller coaster ride of events, an attempt on his life, the selection of a running mate, a nominating convention, his opponent's withdrawal from the race, the entry of a galvanizing new rival, a potential Iranian assassination threat against him, and new layers of security that have brought a bunker-like feel to his properties, more than at any time since he was in the White House. And rather than adapt to changing circumstances, Trump has chosen to ignore most campaign advice and lash out, questioning his opponent's ethnicity, delivering incoherent and unhinged press conferences from Mar-a-Lago, and crying about the size of Vice President Kamala Harris's crowds at her rallies. Now his campaign is worried about carrying even in the state where his running mate serves as senator. Quote, 2 private polls conducted in Ohio recently by Republican pollsters show Donald Trump receiving less than 50% against Ms. Harris in the state, according to a person with direct knowledge of the data. Ohio, not Pennsylvania, Michigan, or Wisconsin. They are now worried about Ohio. Joining our conversation, editor for The Plain Dealer and Cleveland.com, Chris Quinn is back with us. Eddie and Claire are here. When I saw this reporting in the New York Times, I thought about your reporting and the things you've shared on this program. I thought of you instantly, and I'm so happy to have you. Do you think they're going to be looking over their shoulder in Ohio, Chris?
I hope so, but I do have to say, this is a rabbit hole that I fear to go down. The last two elections, all the polling showed it was close, and we reported it, we participated with Baldwin Wallace University in the polling, and it all turned out to be way off. He won by 8 points both times. We've stopped reporting polls. Baldwin Wallace
Leaders are defined by how they handle, respond, and react to unexpected challenges during their tenure. Xavier University professor and political pollster Dr. Silas Lee says, in recent weeks, he's noticed a change in New Orleans Mayor LaToya Cantrell's leadership.
Due to the legal challenges surrounding her, now you see less visibility and communication from the mayor in reference to voters in a time of high anxiety.
Last month, Cantrell's former bodyguard...
I do get the sense Ohio is tired of all of that, does want to like their candidates again. They're decent people who live here. So I'm in a small minority of people who watch it in Ohio who think it could happen, but I would never base it on polls because they've been so wrong for so long.
Well, and Chris, I know from working on campaigns that sometimes it's not that you necessarily think you're going to lose a state, it's that you have to go